Hello, everybody. This is Midnight Mike. Welcome back to my scary stories. The story for tonight is The Legion of Demons. The Curse Follows Home by Mr. Lights Out. I'm Petty Officer First Class Lagera, and this is my story. I've returned to the USS Kitty Hawk, the oldest ship in the U.S. Navy fleet, a steel giant that feels like home after all these years. Most sailors, like me, spend years aboard these mighty ships. It's where we're shaped, tested, and sometimes haunted. But the Kitty Hawk, she's different. Something about her whispers the past. And for some of us, that past never stays behind. The USS Kitty Hawk. The waters of the Arabian Gulf stretched endlessly before me, and I stood there, on the flight deck of the USS Kitty Hawk, staring out into the abyss where the sky and sea bled into one. My body was drenched in sweat, despite the cool night breeze. But it wasn't the heat. It was something else, something that had followed me from Iraq. I tried to tell myself it was just the stress, the constant grind of service life, but deep down, I knew better. The cave. The whispering things, the shadows that didn't belong to men. No matter how far I ran, how many miles of desert and ocean I put between myself and that cursed place, I could still hear them. Footsteps approached from behind, and I stiffened. Lagera. I turned, my breath caught in my throat. If you like stories like this, I do spend long nights making these videos for you. Let me earn your subscription tonight and ring my bell. I will be ringing the bell also when I have new stories for you. Now back to the story. Petty Officer Villanueva, our squadron quality assurance supervisor, stood a few feet away, his arms crossed. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, they weren't looking at me. They were looking past me, into the darkness beyond the railing. You've seen them, haven't you? Villanueva's voice was low, steady, too steady. I swallowed hard. You already know. He exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. Kid, this isn't the first time I've heard of this, and it sure as hell won't be the last. Villanueva finally met my gaze. His eyes weren't filled with doubt or dismissal. No, they were filled with recognition. My father, he said quietly. Ben Luke, Vietnam. Firebase outside Saigon. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Ben Luke, a U.S. outpost, infamous for its brutal jungle warfare. A place where Marines and sailors fought and disappeared in the night, just like the cave in Iraq. Villanueva turned back to the horizon, his fingers tightening on the railing. I stood silent, waiting, but the winds felt colder now, heavier, like they were whispering too. My father was a petty officer in the Navy, assigned to support Marine fire bases near Saigon. Villanueva continued, his voice low. They'd set up perimeters, push back the VC, hold the line, and move out. But one night, in '68, something happened that changed him forever. I just listened, barely breathing. I could feel it, the weight of what was coming. They found a cave during a jungle patrol. A hole in the earth that shouldn't have been there. No VC tunnels. No booby traps. Just bones. Too many bones. The words crept up my spine, freezing me in place. I knew the rest. My father refused to go in, Villanueva said, his voice tight. The others laughed at him, called him superstitious. He told them, this place ain't for the living. But they didn't listen. They went in anyway. I clenched the railing. The knot in my stomach grew. They came back, but they weren't the same, Villanueva said, his voice strained. They sat up at night, talking to something that wasn't there, staring at the jungle like something was watching them. Some of them stopped talking altogether, and then they started dying. My fingers tightened around the cold metal. They found two guys hanging from a tree. One shot himself in the head. Some of them just walked into the jungle in the middle of the night and never came back. I didn't want to ask, but I had to. Your dad made it out. Villanueva nodded, his face grim. Yeah, but he was never the same. Because the thing from that cave didn't stay behind. It came home with him. My heart sank. My father drank himself numb, tried to shut out the voices. The VA called it the jitters, shell shock, combat stress hallucinations, night terrors. Villanueva's voice dropped lower, and his eyes locked onto mine. But I know the truth. He told me before he died. The wind picked up, howling around us. He said, "They follow you home." I felt like I couldn't breathe. The ship, the weight of it, felt heavier now, suffocating. These things, Villanueva continued, his voice softer now, they hide behind PTSD, behind shell shock. That's why nobody questions it when a veteran sees shadows, hears voices, feels like something is always watching. The VA hands the meds, tells them it's just trauma. I could barely focus. I was here, yet I wasn't. I could feel it. It's not trauma, Lagera. It's a haunting. And if you don't fight it, it becomes something worse. Worse. I barely whispered, my throat tight. Possession. Suddenly, a loud clang echoed from below deck. Both of us turned toward the bulkhead. And then, the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not from one place, but from everywhere. My stomach twisted. The ship, it was listening. What do I do? I whispered, feeling the cold sweat trickle down my neck. Villanueva sighed, pulling something from his pocket. A rosary, its beads cracked, the silver cross worn from years of use. You don't acknowledge it. You don't answer it. You don't feed it. His voice was firm, like a warning passed down through generations. I shuddered. And if it doesn't stop? Villanueva turned to me, his face cold and grim. It won't. The lights flickered. The Kitty Hawk groaned, the metal straining, something moving deep in the bowels of the ship. Villanueva pressed the rosary into my palm. This isn't about survival, kid. It's about never letting it in. I gripped the rosary, my hands shaking. But as the knocking grew louder, echoing from the ship's hull, the walls, the floors, I realized something terrifying. It was already inside, and it wasn't leaving, for they were many. That's it for this episode. Thanks for coming. Come back for some more stories, guys. Kind regards to you. Are you brave enough to step into the pages of the unknown? Hit that like button if you love spine-chilling horror. Subscribe if you want more terrifying tales, and comment below. Would you take the comic book or risk the clown's wrath? And please ring the bell for notifications. I will ring the bell also for you. And if you love horror that keeps you up at night, check out my books on Amazon, available in ebook, paperback, and hardcover. All from Mr. Lights Out, the master horror fantasy author from the Philippines, an expat and US vet. Writing books and making videos is his self-cure for minor PTSD. The nightmares don't have to end here. But once you start reading, will you be able to stop? The link is in the description below. Thanks to Lara's Horror Sound on YouTube. But beware, some tales will not stay on their pages. Dare to read.